Hey everyone, this is the ThinkEnergy podcast, and I'm your host, Dan Sege from Hydro Ottawa. Are you looking to better understand the fast-changing world of energy? Well, the ThinkEnergy podcast isn't your ordinary energy show. Every 2 weeks, we take you on a tour and discuss, through a communication lens, some of the coolest trends, emerging technologies, and latest innovations. So stay tuned as we explore some traditional and some quirky facets of this industry. This is the ThinkEnergy podcast. Hey everyone, welcome back. This is episode 16 of the ThinkEnergy podcast. In today's digital world, being a spokesperson for an organization means understanding and navigating today's new media environment. Not just traditional media, but also social media and the arena of public sentiment and criticism, otherwise known as the internet. How does the increasing number of digital tools and social channels influence the approach organizations must take, how they pitch to reporters? Is it easier or harder than 10 years ago? Well, I'm glad you joined me today to find out. Due to the advent of the internet, crisis communication issues can be magnified very quickly if companies don't handle them appropriately. So here's today's big question. People are hungry for real-time information, and there's been a shift from mainstream journalism to citizen journalism. How can organizations better prepare a company spokesperson for today's new media world? To shed some light on this matter, I am joined by a veteran with over 35 years of experience in media relations and strategic communications. He is a highly sought-after training specialist in both the public and private sector. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Ken Anderson. Welcome, and can you share with our listeners a bit about who Ken is and a bit about your journey, your background?
Well, certainly I'm an Ottawa kid, and I have experience on both sides of the microphone, Dan. I'm a former reporter and radio host, did that for about 15 years. After that, I was the spokesperson for the National Arts Centre for almost 7 years, and for the past 20 plus years I've been doing consulting, so I am a little long in the tooth.
And busy.
Just a little bit. I'm slowing down now, actually.
Okay, that's good.
By choice. Choice.
I was just going to say, I'm looking forward to that time in my life. So I'm going to start with a few questions here, if you can just weigh in. The first one is, what are some of the common pitfalls we should avoid during media interviews? How can organizations better prepare?
Well, in terms of pitfalls, the first one is going too long. So simple as that. Keep it short and straightforward. 6 to 15 seconds is really the distance you want to go in your response. The next pitfall really is the people that don't answer the question. If it's an interview such as this that's live to air or live to tape, as opposed to just a short little clip that a reporter may take out of the interview to use as part of a report, people who don't answer the question are seen to be evasive, and people suddenly don't trust them. So you do need to answer the question. It may not be the fulsome response that the reporter may have been fishing for, though, particularly if it's one of those bad days. In terms of other pitfalls, people who don't plan to what they want to say, that's probably the biggest one that I run across in my professional career. And then the people that call me back are the people that don't say what they had planned to say.
Okay.
And they miss the opportunity to get their messages across and wonder why their message didn't get across because, they didn't ask the perfect question.
Yeah, because if you don't convey that message, it could put in jeopardy that social license to operate today.
Oh, certainly you need to respond to the questions, and there's a technique called touch and go. Perhaps we can get into that a little bit later. But I counsel my clients to be question-driven, to be message-driven rather than question-driven.
Cool. Very good. How important is it then to understand the rules of engagement when it comes to a media interview? What are reporters looking for?
Well, they're looking for you to be on the record.
That's all the time.
Even if they offer to go off the record, understand that the reporter hears what you say. Anytime there's a microphone, anytime there's a reporter, there's a set of eyes nearby, you're on the record. That goes with citizen journalists today, too. They see a lot of things, and they may see it out of context and thus misinterpret the messages that are getting across there. The second thing is that I guess a story may already be written, and the reporter's just quote shopping.
Okay.
They may already have all the facts and figures. They may have all the information that they need for the story, but they need you to either validate some information or to balance their story, to get your side.
Okay, that's interesting. So from what I can see, the spokesperson plays quite an important role in getting that information about the organization out to the public and controlling that flow of information. Can you share with our listeners some tips to ensure companies get their message across? You sort of touched on that. So how do they get that message across during an interview?
Well, during the interview, first you have to say it or do it. So today's media is very visually focused, including radio, because radio stations often have a website where they're looking for additional enrichment to have greater exposure with their audiences. So you need to say it or do it and show it to your audiences. You have to look for the types of things that reporters are looking for. At the end of the day, there are three types of stories that get the most coverage, the most interest, because we as an audience like them. The first one deals with health and well-being. And when it comes to Hydro Ottawa, you're integral to our modern lifestyle. Mm-hmm. Electricity is, and if there's any interruption to our service, then our health and well-being could be in jeopardy. Yeah. The next is safety and security. And again, Hydro Ottawa is a big part of that too. You provide the lighting on the streets, you provide the lighting in our homes, and there's a lot of seniors in this market that have medical devices that plug in at night. The last one is your wallet and the administration of public funds. And while Hydro Ottawa is a private company with the City of Ottawa being the main shareholder, that goes for Hydro Ottawa as well. Your administration of the funds that we give you, you're a public utility in that sense, that if you do something wrong with that or make the wrong investments, then people will start talking about it. And if you make the right investments, well, they probably won't notice.
Moving at the speed of light is the new normal. We all need to adapt to new audiences, the social media environment, and speed to market. In an interview situation, is it okay to admit you do not have the answer to a specific question? And you were talking about techniques where you wanted to maybe suggest some of the techniques. So when is it a good time to apply a bridge? I've been fortunate to get some training here. So when can we use a bridge? When can we use transition techniques?
Well, absolutely. There are a number of times where you don't have the answer. Either you don't have the current information or you just, it slips your mind. What you can do is that you use the bridge that you referred to, those bridging phrases. You could say something like, I have to give that more thought before responding, but what I can tell you is. If you, like the late Jack Layton, with frequency change the channel right away, that's another type of bridge or a pivot out there. And that is, you respond something like, with respect, the question we should be asking ourselves is, when we do know the answer, should we respond? I turned your question around, I reformulated it. That's another way to do it, but that tends to feed cynicism if you do that too often. You can pivot to the information that you have all the time. If it's a simple yes or no question, you can answer yes or no, or maybe, depending on what the fact-based information is. But if you don't know what the information is, if you're not up to date with that information, by all means, you can defer and deflect, and you can do that by admitting, I'm going to have to give that some more thought, or
And get back to you.
I'll get back to you on that. But use that as an opportunity to deliver one of your messages.
Okay. Cool. Thank you. How does one, and we've all had those challenges here, how does one maintain composure throughout an interview and create the outcome that we want? Should we be thinking about all of the questions? I think you alluded to that earlier. Should we be doing all of the questions? Should we be thinking about them? Should we be developing all those answers before the interview? Any tips on how to better prepare?
Well, at the end of the day, there are only 7 questions. All questions are an adaptation of the 5 W's and the 2 H's. Who, what, where, when, why, how, and how much. If you've given thought to what you would respond to those 7 questions, then you've done most of your homework. I say most of your homework because you need to decide which of those questions are more important than the others. Formulate your response, and there's a good structure you can think of with a response, and that is, think of a pyramid. The key point you want to get across, you put it right up front. You provide some supporting information, and if you haven't already responded directly to the question posed, then you can add that at the end. That's that touch and go that I referred to earlier. Okay. You touch on the question and go to your response, or you can flip it around, go to your planned message, and then briefly respond to the question posed. When it comes to distractions, though, to keep your composure, the media would rather, and you didn't keep your composure on some days, particularly if they suspect you've done something wrong. They may ask the same question 6, 7, 8 times to try and drive you off your message, particularly if you're a corporate spokesperson for an organization such as Hydro Ottawa, the City of Ottawa, OC Transpo, any of the others out there, even the Government of Canada. They may try to drive you off your message and get that open and unrehearsed response, well, damn right we're worried. Okay. That's because we as an audience love emotion. That's one of the things that the media is fishing for out there. So what you need to do is to focus. You need to be in that zone. You need to minimize distractions. You need to know your message. Don't memorize it. Because if you memorize your message, it doesn't come across particularly well unless you've been doing a lot of acting on the stage at the NAC lately, okay, when you can really deliver a line. And understand that you're not talking to the reporter, you're not talking to that media outlet, you're talking to their audience. It's real people out there. You've got ratepayers, you've got homeowners, you've got seniors, you've got children, you've got teachers, you've got truck drivers, you've got all those segments of the audience out there that will dial into your message more or less depending on what the subject matter is.
Very interesting. Okay, let's move on here, Ken. I'd love to get your thoughts, or maybe even your guidance, on what does media consider newsworthy? I mean, there's a lot of noise now, and as an example, we are asked to comment on a lot of different files, but mindful of their constant deadline, how do we better support media, and how do we actually ensure that it is, I'm not going to say timely and relevant, but that's bottom line, that's what it is. Mm-hmm. So to be on top of those searches in a positive light.
Well, understand that journalists are first taught to tell stories about people. Journalists, by and large, aren't taught well how to tell stories about science or the environment or policy. Some of them do a very good job, but it's mostly human interest stories. So it's stories about people. So if you want to get your messages through all that,
that's very important,
all that clutter out there, don't be talking about your rate. Talk about people and the impacts on people. Yes, there's impacts on the environment, there's impacts on the economy, there's impacts on the wallet, but talk about people from that. So human interest is one part of it. The viral video phenomenon out there, though, has ramped up another of the news values that the media is looking for, and that's the element of surprise or things that are different. I used to explain it this way in my training sessions, where I would talk about dog bites man, it's not news. Man bites dog, it is news. And then lo and behold, about 9-10 years ago, a story came along in the U.S. about some guy that was fed up.
I haven't heard that one.
Some postal worker was fed up with a dog. Okay. But it's those stories that stick out. It's the stories that have impacts, but impacts on people by and large. Stories that have a visual component. Think of all the news that you consume on a regular basis, and think of how much of it is visually focused. If it doesn't have a visual component, television rarely will touch it.
Okay.
And that's spilled over into other media as well. The stories that have been dropped are the long ones that take a lot of explanation. That's why our Saturday Citizen is, only that thick, whereas my first media job as a Ottawa Citizen newspaper carrier, it's amazing I don't have scoliosis from carting that bag around on Saturday, with all the magazines and funny papers and TV Guide and all the other stuff that used to be in there.
Okay. Okay, we're just about to end this one here. What would be the one thing you would want someone to take away from today's podcast? What is the one thing a spokesperson should remember?
At the end of the day, if you are message-driven rather than question-driven, you will get your messages across. You need to have a plan going into your interview with the media. The media will go in with their own plan as well. But I've worked as a journalist and I've talked to a whole lot of journalists over the years. And if you give them something more interesting than what they're asking about, they're going to go with it. Because you know what? That's what their audiences would rather hear about.
Very, very interesting. Very cool. Okay, Ken. Well, listen, we've reached another episode of the ThinkEnergy podcast. How can our listeners learn more about you? How can they connect?
Well, you can look for me on LinkedIn. Just search for Ken Anderson, Ottawa PR.
Very cool. Again, Ken, thank you very much for joining us today. I hope you had a lot of fun.
Take care, Dan.
Hey, folks. Thank you for joining us today. I truly hope you enjoyed this episode of ThinkEnergy. For past episodes, make sure you visit our website, hydroottawa.com/podcast. Lastly, if you found value in this podcast, we'd appreciate a rating on iTunes, or maybe even tell a friend or a colleague. Anyway, this podcast is a wrap. Peace, everyone.